Val Gene ought to bring you more often, brother. That's not common. Uh, Pond Creek native Val Gene Ivan came back to Oklahoma State in 2007 as the director of sports medicine for Oklahoma State. He's a 1985 Oklahoma State grad, got his doctorate from OU. Uh, Before that, he spent 13 years at the University of Tennessee. So it's great to have him. And the thing that was so comforting, I think, this past fall and winter with COVID was you did not wonder if Oklahoma State was ready to play. You wondered if our opponent was ready to play. And this credit starts right here. And you can thank him for being able to go to every game at home at Oklahoma State this past year. So, Dr. Ivan, come on up.
And he put the pressure on me. Thank you for the invitation, Chris. Appreciate being here. It's a nice looking crowd, with the exception of one guy that walked in a long white coat over there. Is a little suspicious looking. You guys better keep an eye on him. But no, you have a very impressive list of speakers, and so I'm coming up. I was just visiting with Chris, and so that's really impressive. You guys are lucky, and you'll have a good time with those people. I'm not a great public speaker. That they put me in an office and deal with kids, and there's a reason for that, I suppose. But anyway, Chris asked me to come and visit a little bit about kind of what we went through last year, particularly in COVID. Unfortunately, it's not over. As we all know, we're still we just had our weekly meeting with the Big 12 team physicians this morning and kind of outlined what it looks like for us. Here we are, August the 1st, and you would think that we would all know exactly what we want to do, but just like last year, we didn't. And we by and large put this all together individually as institutions. The NCAA gave us very little oversight through the summer months and into August and beyond. Not until we got into our seasons was there mandates that we had to be tested to play, and that's what Chris is referring to in regards to how we tested through the season. But the bulk of your protocols were put together by individual institutions, and I can't take credit. I mean, we put those together, but I can't take credit for our success. That has to go to our coaches and our players, student athletes, because it was a very rigorous process dating back to last April when we started it. Everybody had to buy in, which was not easy. That did not happen easy at all. Didn't happen easy for anybody. Didn't happen easy for our administration. It didn't happen easy for student athletes. So as time went on, I think everybody kind of started to see that, hey, this is what we have to do. And if we want to play, this is the best route to go. My plan wasn't perfect. I don't think there was a perfect plan, to be quite honest with you. I think Baylor had probably a very imperfect plan, maybe, because it was like every week, what's canceled next from that perspective. But it took a lot of time to put this all together. So many moving parts in an athletic department when it comes to student athletes. Everything that they do, from when they eat, where they eat, when they train, who they train with, what they're doing in their lockers, how we travel. It was very encompassing, but we had really, really good people that we put together on a committee and worked at it every day. And fortunately, we did well. Now, the stakes are higher this year because this year, instead of canceling and rescheduling, you forfeit. So the stakes are higher, and the challenges are different. And that last year we had no weapons, if you will, like we do this year with the vaccine. Okay. But on the other hand, we found that even vaccinated, you can still be infected. So our carrot has kind of been all along to get our young people vaccinated with the hopes that they won't need to be tested regularly in season. And that's where we're going to start. and hope that works. And if we have an outbreak, then we have to spread it to those that are also vaccinated, which if you followed, that's what happened with NC State at Omaha in the College World Series. So the NCAA took care of that in terms of their postseason testing. That's in their court. They were testing the unvaccinated. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say NC State, the College World Series. They got sent home. Okay. So they tested the unvaccinated, and they found they had a large enough group unvaccinated positive that they went ahead and tested those that were also vaccinated. And in doing so, their numbers rose to the point to where the county that Omaha was in with the NCAA decided that this is considered an outbreak. And they sent them home, which was terribly unfortunate because I thought they were playing really well. So that was the first sign of, in my opinion, of kind of we're not through it yet as we got into the spring and summer, and that now we have a new variant called Delta, with potential of another one called Gamma. It's looming, possibly. But anyway, that's where we're at from a standpoint of the Delta variant, putting our protocols in place. Moving forward, we start our kids report next Thursday for camp, which is basically your August practices report next Thursday. And we'll have everything in place at that point. We tested for the first time today, as we have in football, as we came through the summer. Kind of wanted to see how the Big 12 was looking at this from a protocol perspective. And I hold my breath the day after the test, and I did that all since last April. Fridays last fall were tremendously stressful. We tested on Sundays and Tuesdays with what's called the PCR test, which is a more accurate test. We got the test results back on Mondays and Wednesdays. But then on Friday, we had to use an antigen test because we had to have our results before we boarded the plane to travel, or our opponents likewise had to have the results. And so we all agreed to an antigen test. And so you really just held your breath on Friday afternoons before you boarded. I mean, it was just like, your phone was just blowing up with, are we okay? Do we have any positives? And fortunately, we really did well last fall, and that continued through the rest of the year. I don't know if y'all remember, we canceled one game last year. It was Bedlam basketball here. And the reason was not because we had a lot of positives. We had one positive, but we had beaten Kansas, I think, on a Monday night. And we celebrated a little bit too hard. And so team got together and had a lot of fun. And then out of that next test came one positive. But because I couldn't contact trace through that, I couldn't decipher, I couldn't tell who would subsequently become positive. We had to cancel that one game, not because of a bunch of positives, but just because of the contact tracing, which is really tough to do. So we rescheduled and we did fine, but that was our only hiccup, I think, last year that really I was disappointed in, but it is what it is. You beat Kansas in basketball, you celebrate, I suppose. So anyway, a little bit about our travel last year, which was extremely different. Chris said I've been at University of Tennessee for 13 years and finished my 14th year back here. So very well aware of travel. It's a big show. It's 4 buses to the airport, check in through the airport, get there. 4 buses are waiting on you when you get to your destination, take you straight to the hotel. You get into the hotel. It's very smooth process. You go straight to your catered dinner. It just is all smooth clockwork, by the minute. You're leaving at 4:07. Okay. So by the minute. Well, that was all revamped because instead of 4 buses, and our travel schedule last year, I was blessed because it was easy. This year, not so much. If you guys have taken a peek at the away schedule, we're going to Boise, Morgantown, Lubbock, Austin, and Ames. Okay, so it's a really much different travel schedule, but we bussed everywhere last year with the exception of Baylor. So we would typically take 4 buses once we got off the plane. Last year we took 8. Okay, so you got 8 buses going down the interstate. We alternated kids in seats. So on one side you're in every other row. On the opposite side you're alternating every other row. Okay, in masks. We knew who had COVID and who had not. That made a difference in how we strategically put the people in the buses. And likewise, when we got to the hotel, that's who they roomed with. We were trying to coordinate a positive with someone that hadn't had it. Your thinking is all through this process that you've got to be aware of who converts and who's positive, who becomes sick, but you've also got to be aware of who could be contact traced. Because if you're contact traced, you're just in as bad a spot, really, because they're out also. Now, if you're positive, we had to go through a protocol from a cardiac perspective that was really the only thing that allowed us to play last year. Was our presidents had to buy in that we could do this safely. And Burns was on top of that and questioning, and it was the right thing to do. And we talked with people all over the country, from the Mayo Clinic to every campus, and we felt as though we had a good cardiac protocol put together. And that allowed the presidents to give us the go-ahead to even play the season, really, quite frankly. That's where it started. So so that travel was very, very, very different, very unique. This year, I think it'll be somewhere in between, to be honest with you, because we have so many that are vaccinated. That has to help us. But having said that, as we all know, the vaccinated can still be affected, and hopefully it'll be to a much lesser degree. Hopefully, if you are vaccinated and you get it, your illness will be to a much lesser degree. So that's where we were. Our testing this year, I think, will be a 1 time a week. Has to be prior to competitions, and that's going to be a conference mandate as well. We'll still have all of our designated places. If there's a positive, we remove them from their dorm rooms and we put them in university housing. We had a hiccup last year in the whole process. Is the university had told us, we got housing, we got plenty of housing, because we just didn't know what to expect. And then I can remember sitting there that first day when our results came back, and we had 3 positives on that first return, and we said, okay, now let's get them into housing. And so we made it happen. They all walk into the door of their housing, and it's an empty, bare room, so there's nothing there, so you're thinking, okay, now all the things that you got to have to live. So we had to then go back and think, okay, now who's going to put all this together? We already knew how we were going to get them to meals, but in terms of toothbrush, TV, their computers, their clothes, all their specifics that they need, their books, everything we had to get to them individually. A positive. We were recognized in the conference as the only school that did not lose a starter to COVID throughout the football season. And we were blessed. We were lucky, because we had good protocols, but everybody put a lot of work into this, not just us. So I'm not sure how it happened. And I didn't even realize it happened until we got to Baylor and towards the end of the season, and they had told us that was where we were at. So I thought, wow, that's a surprise for sure to me. So we got through that. Then we got into the bowl season last year. I was concerned. Typical of a bowl trip is a 5 to 10 day trip. We had not done that. Obviously, we've just been doing our regular season games. We leave on a Friday, we come back Saturday night. It's one night. But a bowl trip is usually 5 to 7 days plus. We structured that. We kind of did it just like a away game, but it was just a longer trip to Miami. So we came through that well, as good as we could have from that perspective. Also, football is such a different beast in that there's just so many kids. If you have a smaller team, it's such a different concept of helping them understand and how many can get it, and if they've got it, how they reposition their rooms and such. But we've got 130 kids in football, and inevitably you're not going to get 100% vaccination. It's not going to happen. And inevitably you're not going to get every kid to stay in, when their family comes on a Saturday, to not go out with their family and eat, to not see their friends, to not see their girlfriends. It's just not going to happen. And so those are all the things that we just had to impress upon them. And we had some kids that just did a phenomenal job in really staying in and not getting out and taking care of themselves extraordinarily well, that I just was very thankful for. And like I said, this year it's kind of going to be the second verse to this as this Delta emerges. I'm happy to visit, entertain any questions. I don't know if there's anything specific that you guys would like to ask. I'm happy to. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So the question is kind of the differences in PCR and antigen, and it may be a little different this year than it was last year with the Delta. But we had at last year, as of a Friday, on that Friday test before we left, if you were positive, you stayed home across the board, across the conference. We did have the opportunity to confirm it on Saturday and Monday with the PCR. So you wouldn't be out for 10 days. So we did confirm our antigens with positives last year. We don't know enough and haven't seen enough just yet to know what the Delta will do. The concern at the World Series in Omaha was that the antigen did not catch some of the NC State kids. And so that's why we are thinking if we're going to antigen, it would be 3 times a week. If we're going to PCR, just once. Yes, sir. Yes, that's correct. Question is, testing is a Big 12 mandate required prior to competition. We tracked our positives, and we don't think that we saw any on-field transmission last year in any sport, on court, on field, especially outdoors. But no one has gotten to the point to where they're comfortable mandating a vaccine through any conferences at this point, or the NCAA, even individual teams. It's of ours. No. Now, when you say mandate, a coach can strongly influence. There are a lot of ways to say, we need you vaccinated, but I'm not going to force them. That's a good question. Question is, what percentage of our traveling squad? So this morning, one of the associate commissioners of the Big 12 said, do we have an idea across the board where we're at? And the answer is that we really don't just yet, because some kids are coming in from the summer and we don't have our numbers up to date, and some are going to get it once they know what our protocols will be. But if you have 130 and you have 60 vaccinated, doesn't look too good. But if the 60 are part of your 80 that travel, looks a lot better. And if the 60 are ones that are going to be on the field, looks even better. So it's how you play with the numbers a little bit in regards to what your end result will be. I think it's just personal choice and not trying to infringe upon anyone's personal rights to do that. I don't mandate flu shots. The university has a requirement in regards to vaccinations and immunizations that you have to have in terms of your enrollment. But there's a lot of ways, if you have certain types of illnesses and such, that you can opt out. Religious concerns, you can opt out. So there's some ways that you don't have to be vaccinated. I guess I could add right here, as young people go, some of their issues, some of the reasons for not being vaccinated. One, they had COVID last year, very mild illness. They think that they have some protection. I would agree. I think they have some immunity, but I don't know how much and for how long. But we don't know how much and for how long with the vaccination either. So I think that's a real possibility that they're just not. They think that they shouldn't do it from that perspective. Two, a lot of them are just uncertain with the, how this has been politicized, and just in terms of should I not. It's an educational component by and large. Some will get it simply because they don't want to be tested routinely. So they'll end up getting vaccinated because they think it's easier than going through the routine surveillance testing weekly as we move forward. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, do we have a program that we've instituted for education for vaccinations? So last year, before every team got on campus, I had a Zoom with that team and their parents, every student athlete, those coaches of that sport and their parents. And I outlined for them what we would be doing. I would be calling each family after their student athlete was positive, answered the questions the best I could, because there's so many unknowns. I didn't have all the answers. I started all my meetings by telling every family and every Zoom that, look, I am not Dr. Fauci. Okay. That was on the front end. But yeah, so we get together with the teams and the coaches just like that, and we talk with them in regards to education. I did one just last week, sports, and we encourage parents to be on. After we do, those numbers bump up naturally. But there's some just individuals that you're just in life and just what we're seeing in society, in our community. There's some that are just not going to go there. They're not going to be vaccinated. Well, I would, from our experiences, we've felt most comfortable with the Pfizer. Question was a preferred vaccine. We're probably not in it far enough yet, President Halligan, to know in terms of Delta emergence just yet. We're so early in August, but from what we've seen so far, we've had great success with the Pfizer. The question is if we have any incidents of reinfection. We've been vaccinated. Last year, we had 2 cases of recurrent COVID after an initial case. The second case, they were both the second semester. We didn't know enough about and weren't sequencing to see, was that already Delta or something back then? So we just, at the time, the thinking was they've just got it again, and their immunity didn't last that long. But we have not had any positives yet following a vaccination. Now, obviously, I know there have been some. So once again, knock on wood, but not yet. Now, we tested this morning. I don't have results. I don't have results back yet. Yes, sir.
On your heart testing, I know there's been at least one.
The question is our cardiac protocols. Our cardiac protocols across the conference have been very reassuring. We were already doing when a student athlete comes in even prior to COVID. I do a sickle cell trait test mandated by the NCAA, but I do an EKG and an echocardiogram both on every student athlete that comes in, no matter the sport. So we continued that. That didn't change any. Our Big 12 protocols adopted exactly what we've been doing, with the exception of adding a cardiac MRI if anything was abnormal on those 3 tests. In addition, after COVID, we also did what's called the serum troponin, which is a blood test. It's an inflammatory marker. If they have any inflammation, it would be elevated specifically to cardiac muscle. But we only had, I think we did 3 cardiac MRIs last year out of all of our screening, and we found one abnormality that we since think was an incidental finding. And that's the way it's kind of been across most of the college landscape, is that we're more likely to find incidental findings on cardiac MRI that were already there than specific COVID inflammatory related findings, which is great news. Now, have we gone long enough? Okay, so we are, we're starting to be 1 year out from our first cases. Our first cases were identified last July. So when kids return, is there anything lingering as this long COVID, goes? Is there anything new? There's some talk that we need to follow longer, possibly, but I have repeated EKGs on everybody coming back. So even if they're not a new student athlete, they're going to get an EKG again this year. And then we do an exhaustive questionnaire in regards to any symptoms. A lot of this has to be the student athlete expressing any concerns they have from a functional perspective. If they're exercising, they have to tell us. We can't know unless we see something, but they have to tell us if they're fatigued or short of breath or heart racing, anything along those lines, and we make them know that that's something that we have to be aware of. No, sir, I don't want to. Scott. So the question is concussion protocol questions, how we manage concussion protocol. My concussion protocol has to be submitted to the NCAA. They can vary, and it has to be approved by the NCAA medical director is a neurologist, Brian Hainline. And so he's real, and he's an okay neurologist. Yeah. He's not my first call that I make to the neurologist. That's a great one, Dr. Wedlake. Yeah, so my first call is obviously Dr. Wedlake, but no, there's a committee, then they review your protocols, and you sign off, goes to the athletic director, then they know exactly what you're doing in regards to how you're evaluating. We do baseline studies on computer-based studies on every student athlete yearly. So we have a baseline of their cognitive function. And then after they're injured, if the injury is deemed a concern, then we do a modified version of that on the field. If they pass that with a physical exam that's not concerning, then they're allowed to go back. If not, and they don't pass the questionnaire part, then they're withheld from the rest of the game. A lot of that also depends on the previous history. If they had one earlier in the game that was mild and then another one, that's a red flag. If they had one the week before, seemed to recover completely, that's a red flag. They usually don't play in a game on Saturday if they're not ready to practice by Thursday.
Seems to me like we sort of hit a wall. People who are going to be vaccinated. What's going on in terms of treatment? I know there's a lot of push to develop a vaccine. There also are the also
Yeah, so the question is, how do we move past kind of the stage that we're at, minus vaccines, when we have a virus? And you're kind of leaning towards how we manage influenza. You know, we have Tamiflu, and that helps. That's reassuring. We have flu vaccines and Tamiflu, but until we have that, you know, people, they want to use this analogy with the flu and COVID, but you just don't see the numbers of hospitalizations with the influenza and the deaths with influenza yearly as you're seeing with COVID. So there's clearly a difference. And you know, well, no, you're right. I mean, how we understand, how we know, we don't know. But that's the hope. But I mean, unless Dr. Wedlake can chime in here, unless you're aware of new treatments that are being developed that I'm not. I mean, that's obviously, you know, as variants emerge and viruses mutate, that's the challenge of trying to treat them. So I think the approach to this point has been trying to mitigate that on the front end and not spread it further, versus once you have the disease, how do you treat it? Now, the treatments have come a long ways, and even Scott could could chime in regards to what's happening as an inpatient. I could add, we did not have anybody admitted last year in our population. We had some kids certainly sicker than others. And the few that we've had positive through the summer were sicker than others. So I do think my thinking is right now that Delta is looking like it's going to make our young people a little bit more symptomatic and sicker than it did last year, than the initial variant did last year.
Learned that Vancomycin is not working on the Delta as well as it did on the earlier. We are trying to get Regeneron and some of the other medications, drugs that we think are going to impact Delta. So that is a little different.
Would be great if we had a positive and then we could institute Tamiflu, you know, or the equivalent, which is where we would love to be, but we're just not there. And I'm not a researcher to know how close we are. They keep me pretty locked up over there in Gallagher, Ivan. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ivan. It's a very timely program.